You're listening to Radigan's RockCast, a series focused on talking about music from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even current. Now, here's your host, Tom Radigan.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to Radigan's RockCast. I am, of course, your wonderful host, Tom Radigan. I really appreciate you for being on, whether that's Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, WNYO, wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you very much. So for today's video, we are going to be talking about the Beatles' third album, A Hard Day's Night. Now, I mentioned the other two albums. This was their third album. When I listen to this album, it's a 30-minute album, and for 30 minutes, everything is perfect. Nothing is wrong in the world to me when I listen to this album. And it's that same moment every time. When I listen to that album, I'm in a happy place, It's just like, listening to, the voices of, of Paul and John and all that. I will mention it was the first album of theirs that had only original material by them, and the only album that dominated with just Lennon and McCartney on it. So, this was actually the first Beatles album I ever bought. The first Beatles album I ever listened to was on a cassette, and that's going to remain nameless at the moment, that name, just because, I want to build it up for when I talk about that album. But anyway, so I was 6 years old, wasn't even 7 yet, and I was with, so I was at Barnes & Noble with my family. My sister, my dad let us pick out an album for the day. I think it was because we, got a good grade in school, so they let us pick out an album and all that stuff. I think we all each got an album to pick out. My parents would have us do that sometimes, when they would treat us by letting us, letting us pick out any album we wanted to listen to. So my sister picked out, I do remember this, she picked out the 1950 Cinderella soundtrack, and I picked out, because, I was a huge fan of the Beatles, so I looked at the catalog of the Beatles, because I was already a huge fan after listening to that one album of theirs, and, I think I was already listening to, the radio station that had this Beatles segment called Beatles Brunch, which I mentioned in the last edition, so it was, this is what I miss about Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble is not like this anymore. It doesn't have as much of a big CD catalog as it once did, because, CDs are not as, big as they once were. But, I saw each album, and, a lot of, I was looking through a few of the Beatles albums, and there was something about The Hard Day's Night that, stood out to me. And my father talked about that album. He told me that he loved that album, and, it was, I think what really stood out to me was the cover art, of the photos of all five of them, and what really, in that black and white, I thought that was really cool, and I loved the photo with George, where he just has, where it just shows the back of his head, and I remember even saying to my dad, I'm like, why do they have the back of his head? He's like, well, I guess he just took that, yeah, and I'm like, is that even George? Oh, he's like, yeah, that's probably George. I remember that. It's the little things you remember about the albums and all that stuff. But I remember looking at the track list, and I do remember that I knew the song Rock and Roll Music already, because when I saw the list, the song that said I'm Happy Just to Dance With You, I thought, oh, is that that song? And he's like, no, and my dad was saying, no, that's a different song. My dad had to explain a lot to me about the Beatles at the time, because it was funny, listen, when you're young, and when you're 6 years old, and you're obsessed with something, normally kids are obsessed with toys or something like that, or specifically maybe even Star Wars or Harry Potter, which I was actually at that time too. But but the thing was, not a lot of people that I knew were really obsessed when it came to the Beatles and all that stuff, or I was into this stuff at a really young age, and and I just there was something about me that it was just that made me feel connected to these people who I didn't even know, and it was very interesting to me. I just there was something about their songs that just made it feel that just made you feel cool, just made you feel like at ease, made you feel like nothing's wrong in the world, when you listen to them. And yeah, that's how I felt when I listened to that album, especially. So yeah, I mean, the thing too, that I really got to point out, I believe, with this album is that, I think this is the best album for John Lennon. I think John dominated this album. I think, he had 9, he sang lead on 9 of the tracks, when, like, Paul only sang really, like, 3 of the songs, and George only had 1, Ringo didn't even have a song. It was pretty clear at this time that, if there was any leader of the group, or anybody that was seen as the leader, it was John. And of course, like I've said, it was always perceived how John and Paul were like the lead singers, and Paul was also that other, creative force at that time too. But, this album just was, I think, the prime of John Lennon, I think. I think this album is just something that, definitely defines his music, defines his thing, and, sorry about that buzz and all that stuff. Hope that doesn't ruin the sound too much, and all that, and, there it happens again, is what it is. We are just going to, deal with that at the moment. I found a way to deal with that, so don't worry. I think we're all good. We are all good, people. So let's talk about the album now. Let's talk about A Hard Day's Night. So, A Hard Day's Night has about 13 tracks on it. So Ringo didn't sing lead on any of them. It was just John, and it was just John and Paul, and George sang one, but it was really John was the main force of the group, for this one. And so the songs that he absolutely kills on are A Hard Day's Night, of course, the title track, Tell Me Why, I'll Be Back, and You Can't Do That. The way Paul shined on this album was singing harmony on a lot of John's songs, honestly. Like If I Fell and I'll Be Back. Paul's Can't Buy Me Love was the hit from the album. The other 2 songs he sang lead on, of course, are, And I Love Her and, Things We Said Today. The thing about, I always thought Paul's songs were underrated. I think the thing, especially what is interesting about a song like And I Love Her, to me, I think, was that it was one of the songs that just, the opening guitar riff, is just, I think, works pretty well. The do 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 do, like hitting the low register of those notes. And Paul, it's an interesting story of how Paul talked about how that came about, because Paul was trying to struggle how he was going to do the work on that solo and all that. So what he decided to do was so George was playing the record, and George was playing the guitar record. No, George was playing the guitar, and Paul, heard the music coming out of it, and he was like, "Wait, do that again." And, that's how it worked. And the thing that it should be known about George is that he was very open with helping song structures and all that stuff. And he was just somebody who would come up with these notes whenever you need it, really. Or, whenever you needed a specific, type of, way to, do a song, he always found a way to do it, I remember hearing the story of Paul talk about when, they were young and they were, trying to find a riff to play That'll Be the Day. George was able to get that, right before them. We're like, how'd you do that? And, that works pretty well. But another thing to mention on that song is, because even though Ringo doesn't sing, he dominates it with his drumming, and especially his bongo playing on And I Love Her. How he plays the bongos on that. It's just very, the way he does that is pretty good. And George is, and of course George's acoustic guitar. So even though George doesn't sing a lot on this, Ringo doesn't sing at all, they dominate it by being the rhythm section, the backbone of the music, you know. John, like, that's the thing. I feel like John and Paul were the creative forces of the songwriters and singers, when George and Ringo were the musical structure at that point. Not to say that John and Paul weren't talented musicians, they were. They all four shined. That is why, in a sense, they are probably the only group that can really, you know, qualify as four frontmen, you know. They were the four, you know. There was no side person. These guys all were just, you know, personality wise too. They all had, everybody loved, you know, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. You know, they were just like these cool, you know, go lucky young kids that, you know, just happened to be talented at music. So, you know, for instance, yeah, like, so I've talked about a few songs that I really love with John, but let me talk a little bit about, like, the harmonies and all that stuff. So Tell Me Why is a great song, and honestly, because John's voice on that is just, like, he's really, like, howling on that, doing really, you know, just like, I love the scene in the film of Hard Day's Night when they perform that, and I like how they play the live version of it. But the harmonies, again, we see of John and of George and Ringo, of George and Paul. And I kind of always found it funny how, like, Tell Me Why and Ask Me Why were, like, the same kind of, like, you know, Ask Me Why was one thing, and then Tell Me Why, we're telling you why. And it's kind of funny too how I noticed, I don't know if this was you know, on purpose, but they're both the sixth track on the album, which is kind of funny in a sense, which could have been which they could have known what they were doing, but it works well, and yeah, George and Paul's harmonies on that are just, you know, like I think it works so well on it too, you know, like the harmonies, how they just, you know, like how they just, like, correlate, and, you know, it works so well. It just it works incredibly well, honestly. There's no complaints there, you know. You know, it's just, this album is a perfect example of the time when the Beatles were in sync, honing their craft, and the prime of their life. It's my second favorite Beatles album of all time. Now, so one thing now is I do want to get into more of the song structure of, so a few of the songs that I love that I haven't got a chance to mention, really go into, are, of course, Anytime at All. I love that song from John. I Should Have Known Better is a song that I've always thought was great. I mean, I remember, you know, listening to Hard Day's Night, you know, for the first time, and listening to that song and loving, like, that, you know, that power chord that's just, like, it's so recognizable when you play it. But what I really, like, you know, it was like, that song was great, and I'm like, well, what could be better than that? Then you hear the harmonica for, you know, I Should Have Known Better, and it's like, wow. And then it just gets better after next. If I Fell, a slower ballad, beautiful harmonies between John and Paul. Then George's I'm happy just to dance with you, that little fast melody beat. And then you got And I Love Her and all that. And, you know, it's funny because we talked a little bit about that already, but And I Love Her, I think, is probably, because there was a Beatles trivia thing I took one time, and somebody asked, like, what Beatles song do you think should have been a number one hit? And I said And I Love Her, because it was not a number one hit. It should have been. It's honestly, I will say it's better than Yesterday. Honestly, that's my opinion. I think it's one of Paul's best love songs that he ever wrote. Honestly, just the structure on it, like, when I listen to it, I just think of a young Paul McCartney. Like, I'm like, when, you know, like, I mean, listen, Paul's music is great, and, like, Paul even makes great music now. But, like, the thing about it is that Paul's music in that time was just like, this guy was on top of the world. This young cat knew how to make a song, how to pull the heartstrings of millions, and just make a beautiful song. And of course, okay, they had the hit "Can't Buy Me Love," which is great and all that stuff. And I remember listening to it and, like, you know, being like, oh, I know that song, and, you know, I'm loving the guitar riff and all that stuff. And, you know, because it's the main single, it's great and all that stuff. But there are a lot of other songs that I want to talk about that mean more to me on the album. like Anytime at All, the song after that, I love that. I'll Cry Instead. However, I feel those songs had a little bit more of a sadder vibe. I think Can't Buy Me Love had a little bit of this happy vibe. And even though Anytime at All and I'll Cry Instead are great songs, there's this very like emotionally sad vibe just when you hear them. And it's just like, the thing about it is, like, over the time as I listened to it more and more, I just realized, wow, John really is the king. I mean, John just can, John's just honestly, like, it made me realize that, like, John is probably, like, my favorite Beatle of all time, of that. I mean, all of them are, like, I love all of them equal in a sense. I mean, I do love all of them, but I feel like John really, there was just something about John that I just felt like his music was always something I could identify with. That was the same with my father. My father felt the same way about him, in that sense too. He just felt like his music was something that he could always identify with too. And it's sweet that you can have music you can have an artist or something that you can feel that relates to you. And I think it's sweet that, like, my family, like me and my father, have that connection. Like, even when I talk to him, when I'm older, I realized that he and I are more similar than I ever thought as a kid. The way he was talking or was bringing out the emotions that I felt that I never really could talk about with anybody else, because not like a lot of my friends were huge Beatles fans at the time, really, and all that stuff. And still, I can't go into depth with that many people about these conversations and stuff, about conversations about the group and all that stuff, and specific, the nuances of that. So it's cool when, I'm still talking to my father now and realizing that, like, oh yeah, we really are, similar in a sense. And, that's, I think, the power of music. The power of music can help you realize that. And I think it works so well to me. And, it's a dear place in my heart. Another few songs I want to talk about are the last three songs on the album. When I Get Home, You Can't Do That, and I'll Be Back. So these are, of course, When I Get Home and You Can't Do That are two songs that are pretty much like, sound the same and all that. But the backing vocals and, like I said, John, Paul, George, they're all in sync with all this stuff. Like Please Please Me, of course, but, really, like, expanding more and just, these songs are just sounding more, interesting to listen to, more interesting lyrics. I love, like, in the line, like in When I Get Home, like when I get home tonight, I'm gonna love her until the cows come home. I love You Can't Do That because, and especially, I've always loved the line. I always found it funny as a kid, like, everybody's green because I'm the one that wants your love. And I was like, why is everybody green? What the heck? And I remember, like, finding that so funny, that line. And that was, like, the line that, like, stuck out to me. Just, like, that was, like, one of the lines that stuck out because it was just, like, when you hear that, it just sounds like such an unusual sentence. Everybody's green, Like, it's just, it's just so great to me, honestly, that, like, that was the title of the, that was, like, the in the song. Like, it's so fun. And, like, oh my god, the guitar solo that John does is just so incredible, because George was the lead guitarist, but, like, in that one, he just he wails it. John was the one who did that, and that was just great, honestly. Just, it works, because it's funny, because I thought it was George who did that, but when George and Paul are doing the backing vocals, John's the one that's doing that, and it just shows that John was a good musician. He didn't have to just be a rhythm guitar player. He also, like I said, these guys were talented musicians. And all that stuff. They had their role and all that stuff, but they could go into other stuff. I mean, John played bass on some stuff. George played bass at one point. And how we'll end it is talking about my favorite song of theirs on the album, which is I'll Be Back. This is a song that I think is so underrated, and I think is something is another song that's very overlooked in the Beatles catalog, but I think it's one of their greatest songs, honestly. The emotion of it, the way the way John and Paul's harmonies are on that, the way they sing this song together, John, even having a little bit of a solo in it, his voice is so, like, that was another song I always found, like, so sad the way they're singing it, but, like, and I even when I listen to it now, I still at times will get that sad emotion, but, like, it's honestly, I don't know, like, what am I being sad at, like, the lyrics in the song, or just, like, find that just it's so soothing that it just brings back nostalgia of listening to that as a child. Like it's so I think a beautiful thing, and like I said, like John Paul's harmonies on that sounding like even like going back to the 50s roots of like the Everly Brothers. But when John like just sings his parts, I think it's just like it shows you, yeah, this is John's album. John was the guy who, wanted to be a rock and roller ever since he was a teenager. He's finally, getting his dream. And this album, I think, is his, masterpiece, in that sense. This is, he has reached it. He's made the top. Nothing. It's like at this point, nothing's bigger than this. He's there on the level of Elvis. He's even bigger than Elvis. They were at this point, they were already the biggest in, and they were it showed it was in time for a new generation, a new a new type of fan base, a new type of music act was gonna dominate the airwaves instead of 50s artists, and it just shows that with this album. That's it for today's podcast. I thank you guys for watching and or viewing or listening. Remember my organization, Digital Music Association. I am Director of Correspondence for that. We meet on Tuesdays if you are at SUNY Oswego at 5 p.m. All right. Thank you and see you guys later.